May 1940. The world is unraveling. In the span of a few brutal weeks, the unthinkable has become reality. The vaunted French army, considered the finest in Europe, is shattered. The remnants of the British Expeditionary Force, nearly 400,000 men, are trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk, their backs to the sea. The Low Countries have been overrun. And in London, a new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, faces a simple, horrifying calculation. Should the British Empire seek terms with Adolf Hitler? Should it surrender? This is not the story of a battle. It is the story of a decision. A decision made in smoke-filled rooms, under the threat of imminent invasion, against the counsel of powerful men. This is the story of how one man's indomitable will forged a nation's resolve. This is how Churchill refused to surrender and kept Britain fighting alone. To understand the magnitude of Churchill's decision, we must first grasp the depth of the crisis. On Friday, May 10, 1940, as German panzers launched their devastating offensive in the West, Winston Churchill, aged 65, was summoned to Buckingham Palace and asked by King George VI to form a government. He later wrote he felt as if he were walking with destiny. But this destiny arrived on a tide of catastrophe. By May 26, Operation Dynamo, the miraculous evacuation from Dunkirk, was underway. While a success in saving the army, it was a disaster in military terms. Nearly all of Britain's heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, trucks, was abandoned in France. The army at home was crippled, armed with little more than rifles. The United States, bound by strict neutrality acts, was a spectator. The Soviet Union was still in a pact with Hitler. Britain stood utterly alone. And in this vacuum of hope, a political battle commenced, one as critical as any fought with bullets. Within Churchill's own war cabinet, a formidable voice argued for exploring and negotiated peace. That voice belonged to Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary. Aristocratic, diplomatic, and deeply pragmatic, Halifax believed it was his duty to ascertain what terms Hitler might offer. To him, it was sheer folly to allow the nation to be destroyed for the sake of honor when the terms of a settlement might preserve the empire and British independence. He was not alone. This was a sentiment shared by a significant portion of the British establishment, who viewed Churchill as a dangerous romantic. Arrayed against Halifax was Winston Churchill. The new Prime Minister was a complex figure. A historian, a failed strategist of Gallipoli in the First War, a political outsider for a decade and now Britain's war leader. He saw the conflict not as a traditional European power struggle, but as a moral crusade against what he termed a monstrous tyranny. To him, any negotiation was not only futile but a path to irreversible subjugation. The crucible for this clash of ideologies was the War Cabinet, meeting sometimes multiple times a day in the underground cabinet war rooms, a cramped, stuffy bunker beneath the Treasury building. The air was thick with cigar smoke and dread. Outside, the first trickle of horrific news from France was turning into a flood. Churchill's position was perilously weak. He led a coalition government. The Conservative Party, which dominated it, was still loyal in many ways to the former Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain. Churchill could not simply command. He had to persuade, cajole, and outmaneuver. May 2060. As Dynamo begins, the War Cabinet meets. Halifax presents his case with cool logic. The French, he warns, are collapsing. With France gone, what is the rational strategic calculation? Should they not at least ask Mussolini, the Italian leader, to mediate and discover Hitler's price for peace? He argues that if the terms were to guarantee the integrity of the British Empire and its fleet, they might be acceptable. The alternative, he implies, is the obliteration of the nation from the air and a bloody, hopeless invasion. Churchill responds not with logistics but with spirit. He speaks of going down fighting. He argues that the nation's position, while dire, is not yet desperate. But the pressure is immense. Later that day he meets with the full outer cabinet, a larger group of ministers. Here he deploys the full power of his oratory, not yet heard by the public. He tells them he has thought carefully in these last days, whether it was his duty to consider negotiations. And then he declares, if this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground. The ministers, many who had been skeptical, roar their approval. He has his first victory, but the inner war cabinet, the real seat of power, remains divided. May 27. A day of pure gloom. The evacuation from Dunkirk is faltering. Only about 8,000 men are rescued. The Belgian army surrenders unconditionally, exposing the eastern flank of the Dunkirk perimeter. In the War Cabinet, Halifax returns to the charge more insistent. He challenges Churchill directly. What is the Prime Minister's plan for actually winning the war? What is the reasonable chance of victory? Churchill's answers are, by necessity, vague. He speaks of defending the island, of the power of the Royal Navy, of the hope that one day the United States might join. To Halifax, this is not a strategy, it is a prayer. The meeting ends in stalemate. The tension is now personal, palpable. Churchill confides to his private secretary that he fears a peace faction is forming, one that could potentially remove him. He knows Halifax is communicating his views to others, that the threads of political power are straining. May 28. The crisis reaches its peak. The War Cabinet meets at 11 a.m. Halifax is prepared for a final, decisive push. He states that if Churchill cannot guarantee victory, they must ask for terms through Mussolini. He is supported, to a degree, by Chamberlain. Churchill is cornered. He knows he cannot outright reject the proposal without risking a split that could collapse his government. Then he executes a masterstroke of political theater. He declares the discussion is too vital for the small War Cabinet alone. He will meet with the full 25-member Outer Cabinet at 4 p.m. He knows this body, having heard his fiery rhetoric just 2 days prior, will support him. He buys time. The 11 a.m. meeting adjourns, unresolved. Churchill leaves the room, the weight of the free world on his shoulders. He knows what is at stake, not just his premiership, but the very soul of Britain's resistance. That afternoon, Winston Churchill, isolated and under unimaginable strain, prepares for the most important meeting of his life. He knows the facts are against him. The military situation is a nightmare. The German Wehrmacht, the most powerful war machine in history, now holds the entire coast of Western Europe from Norway to the Pyrenees. The Luftwaffe could soon be based just 22 miles away in Calais. The British Army is a phantom force. The Home Guard is being formed with pitchforks and shotguns. The Royal Air Force's fighter command is powerful but finite. Every Spitfire and Hurricane lost over Dunkirk is irreplaceable. The Kriegsmarine, bolstered by the capture of Norwegian and French ports, is a growing threat. And across the Atlantic, President Franklin D. Roosevelt sends words of sympathy, but his hands are tied by Congress and American public opinion, which is overwhelmingly isolationist. The strategic calculation as laid out by Halifax is mathematically sound. To continue the war is to risk total annihilation. An invasion attempt, Operation Sea Lion, is being planned in Berlin at that very moment. If it succeeds, the consequences are unthinkable. A Nazi jackboot on British soil, the dismantling of Parliament, the subjugation of the people. The sensible, rational choice is to sue for peace while the Empire and its navy still have value as bargaining chips. Fear, cold and clinical, grips the corridors of power. It is not the fear of cowards, but the fear of responsible men who believe they are presiding over the final chapter of a 1,000-year history. The very air in London feels charged with impending doom. Reports of fifth columnists and paratroopers are rampant. The nation holds its breath, waiting for leadership. And at 4 p.m., Churchill walks into the cabinet room to face not just his ministers, but the judgment of history. He begins to speak. He does not offer false optimism. He lays out the grim reality with unflinching honesty: the defeat in France, the peril at Dunkirk, the threat of invasion. He tells them of Halifax's proposal for mediation. And then he shifts. He speaks not as a strategist, but as a prophet of national character. He tells them that whatever the terms Hitler might offer, they would inevitably be a trap, leading to vassalage. He declares that Britain's strength lies in its people's resolve. His words, recorded in diaries of those present, are electrifying. He says, "I am convinced that every man of you would rise up and tear me down from my place if I were for one moment to contemplate parley or surrender." He vows that if the long history of the British Empire is to end, it must end only when every one of us lies in the dust, strangled with his own blood. The effect is transformative. One by one, ministers from all parties, Labour, Liberal, Conservative, rise to pledge their unwavering support. They reject any notion of peace talks. They choose defiance. Churchill leaves the room, his political position unassailable. He has won. Now he must go back and face Lord Halifax. At 7 p.m. the War Cabinet reconvenes. The dynamic has irrevocably shifted. Churchill is no longer a solitary voice. He carries with him the empowered, passionate will of the entire government. He reports, with iron resolve, that his outer cabinet would never tolerate any suggestion of negotiations. They would rather, he states, that the government was removed than agree to such disgrace. He turns the discussion from whether to fight to how to fight. He talks of fighting in the streets, of guerrilla warfare, of never surrendering. Halifax, the supreme realist, is stunned. His pragmatic argument has been overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion and willpower. He is now utterly isolated. The minutes of the meeting record his subdued response. He is deeply concerned, but acknowledges the mood. The policy of exploring terms is dead. But Churchill's victory in that bunker is only the beginning. He must now transmit that iron resolve to the British public, to the world, and to the watching dictator in Berlin. He must crystallize the choice made in secret into a public mantra. The instrument for this would be his speech to the House of Commons on June 4th, following the successful, yet desperate, evacuation of Dunkirk. Standing before Parliament, he does not spin the miracle of Dunkirk as a victory. He calls it a colossal military disaster. He warns of the imminent threat of invasion. And then he delivers the phrases that would become the bedrock of British identity for generations. He speaks of defending the island, whatever the cost may be. He promises to fight on the beaches, fight on the landing grounds, fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender. The speech is a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It is aimed as much at Hitler and Roosevelt as it is at the British people. To Hitler, it sends an unequivocal message: there will be no deal. To Roosevelt, it shows a nation worthy of support, a nation with the courage to be a beacon. And to the British public, it tells the unvarnished truth while imbuing them with a sense of historic purpose. The decision of the War Cabinet is now the anthem of the nation. Britain will fight alone. The immediate outcome of Churchill's refusal was the Battle of Britain, which began just weeks later. The Luftwaffe sought to gain the air superiority necessary for invasion. The few, outnumbered and flying over their own soil, prevailed. Churchill's words, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few," immortalized their struggle. The invasion was postponed indefinitely in September 1940. The human cost of the decision was paid in the rubble of British cities during the Blitz, which killed over 40,000 civilians. It was paid by the sailors of the Atlantic convoys, and by soldiers fighting in lonely, losing battles in North Africa and the Far East in the years before the tide turned. But the spirit held. Historically, Churchill's decision in May 1940 is regarded as one of the most significant of the 20th century. It kept a flame of resistance alive in Europe. It provided the unsinkable aircraft carrier from which the liberation of Europe would eventually be launched. It proved to the United States that there was an ally worth arming and ultimately worth joining. Without Britain fighting on in 1940 and 1941, there would have been no D-Day, no Western Front, and the entire course of the war would have been left to a titanic and unfathomably different struggle between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. For his leadership, Winston Churchill received the gratitude of a nation and a world. While he was awarded no specific medal for these days in May, his legacy is the highest honor. In 1953 he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II and awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his historical writings and oratory, the very tools he used to forge a nation's will in its darkest hour. The defiance of May 1940 was not a foregone conclusion. It was the product of fierce debate, profound courage, and the unwavering will of one man who saw beyond immediate survival to the eternal stakes of freedom. He channeled the soul of a nation and shaped the destiny of the world. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Vault as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.